can remember. I've got Neville Naden with us today, and Neville has been a mission partner of St. Matthew's for as long as I can remember. How long has it been?
Probably 10 years.
Yeah, long time. And can you tell us? Yeah, can you tell us what you're doing at the moment, what your role is, and where you're based?
Yeah, well, I've moved into a new role 2.5 years ago, working with Bush Church Aid Society, and that is as their Indigenous Ministry Officer. So basically that means helping BCA think through Indigenous ministry around the country and how better they can do that. We have a number of Aboriginal staff, and we have a number of staff that are working, that are non-Aboriginal, that are working in areas where there are a lot of Aboriginal people. And so BCA are wanting to empower staff to work better in the Indigenous space, basically.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
We've been talking today a lot about racism, personal and systemic, and about people's experiences of it. And I'd just be interested to hear, what has your experience been as an Indigenous minister in Australia, or as an Indigenous person growing up? What's been your experience of racism?
One of the fortunate things for me is I grew up in a home where there was a lot of Christian influence, and my dad and mum tried to protect us from a lot of the racism that took place in the community. Not that we weren't exposed to it, we were. I can remember going to school, and just some of the conversations at school with kids, would use racist language, calling us bungs or abos, or, just terminology that just wasn't... well, it was accepted back then, but wouldn't be accepted today. People today would look down on it. And so, that's what we're exposed to. There were things like, go to school, young people would have flavouring for their milks, because back in them days, everyone was giving a bottle of milk every morning when they went to school. And a lot of the white kids went to school and they had their Milos and Quick and other things that they'd put into the milk to flavour it. We didn't have those sorts of those flavourings at all. And so, and they wouldn't share with you. You sit in the playground. So it was an us and them type of situation. But there were times when we had established rapport with other kids. So not all the kids were like that, but there were a few, and you knew who the kids were who would have those attitudes. They were generally children of farmers that would come into town and go to school. They moved around like there was someone else, I suppose. And they didn't want to associate with us Aboriginal kids.
How have things changed, or have they?
Well, for me and for my family, we still get exposed to it. Like, there were times when, after Kathy and I were married, and you guys have met Kathy, she's light complexion and she could be mistaken for being a non-Indigenous person. When we'd travel, we'd pull up motels, and if we're camping in a motel, I'd send her in to book us in because of the racial profiling that goes on. And I think a lot of that still happens today. I can remember being over in Port Augusta once. We had just bought a new black four-wheel drive Nissan, and it was brand spanking new. And we were driving down a road in Port Augusta, and next minute the police pulled up behind us. And as he was walking to the car, I stuck my head out the window and I said, "What kind of black fella own a nice car?" To which he was absolutely shocked. Anyhow, we had some discussions, and he apologised. They were looking over the car, tried to in some way to discredit the car. And I said, "Mate, this is probably newer than any." I said, stuck my head out the window again and said to the young police officer, I said, this is probably newer than anything you've got in your front yard. I said, so what are you trying to do here? And so we had a few discussions. He said, well, look, he said, we never pulled you over because you're driving a nice car. It's just a random thing. And, you know, that, again, that's racial profiling. Because if you're not pulled over for a reason, then it's because you're a black figure in a nice vehicle. So, yeah, so little things like that still prop up every now and again. It doesn't happen as much these days. And I think it doesn't happen to me so much because I'll call out racism where I see it. Because then the sad thing about it is a lot of people don't. They just hear it, they see it, and they'll just allow it to continue instead of calling people out on it.
What kind of effect does that have on someone on a day-to-day?
Well, it affects me because I see a lot of it on social media because I'm always on Facebook. And you see a lot of the racial profiling going on. You see a lot of the racial attacks on Indigenous people in the space. You know, you see a lot of this stuff around the BLM, you know, Black Lives Matter stuff. And you see church leaders actually speaking out and saying, look, we shouldn't engage in these discussions because it comes from a Marxist ideology, which is garbage. It doesn't come from that. It's just people who don't like racism, who understand the injustices that have taken place against Indigenous people, want things addressed. And I think that we all should be working towards that. You know, Micah 6:8 talks about, you know, you've shown you, O man, what is good. And that is to, you know, love God, walk humbly before your God, and to love justice, you know. And we as God's people are called to love justice, to seek justice for people who are oppressed. And we don't do a very good job of that, you know. Sometimes we just want to sit on our hand, bury our head in the sand and hoping that it'll all go away, but it's not going to go away unless we seek to address it.
Tell me, how does being a Christian enable you to not only understand race, but also celebrate it?
My understanding of this is that God has allowed all cultures of the world to develop. And it was He that had given my people place and life. And so, and I might have shared this at St. Matt's before, and if I do, I apologise. But my understanding of the Old Testament is that in the first 10 chapters of the book of Genesis, you know, there was no distinctions of race, language, groups. That didn't happen until Genesis chapter 11, where God came down and confused the languages, and people were then dispersed across the face of the earth. And so when people left Babylon, at that time, they took with them their understanding of God. And from that point on, all the cultures of the world began to develop. And so, as I understand that, you know, I rest in knowing that it was God that allowed my culture to develop. Now, is all my culture good? No, I'm not saying that at all. I think there's good and bad in every culture. But at the end of the day, I think we need to work out those things that are good and those things that are not beneficial to us moving forward as Indigenous people. And it's trying to discern according to what the Bible says about what is good in culture and what is bad in culture, because at the end of the day, that's got to be a yardstick by which we measure all things. And so knowing that it was God that allowed our cultures to develop, I rest in that. And the other thing is that knowing that one day God is going to bring about justice for my people, and I don't know what that looks like. You know, the children of Israel were enslaved for 430 years, and they continued to cry out for justice, didn't they? And at the end of the day, colonisation has only been around for 230, 240 years. And so, you know, we might continue to cry out for another 200 years, should the Lord tarry. And my people will continue to do that and God will bring about justice, I believe.
Yeah.
This land was illegally acquired. Aboriginal people have never ceded sovereignty over this land, and so there will be a day of reckoning for everyone in this country, and I rest in knowing that that's going to happen. Because it's a strange thing, and why I say it's strange is because we in the church, and when I talk about church, I'm including myself in this. We have buildings built on land that was taken from Aboriginal people illegally and given to the church. The church is not complicit in the taking of the land, but they were the recipients of land that was taken from Indigenous people. And so the church has got a moral and ethical dilemma on their hand. What do they do about that? How do they go about addressing that particular issue? Now, I don't know. How do we, and I'm not saying how do you, I'm including myself because I'm a part of the church, but how do we go about addressing this? And the only way that I can see us moving forward in this space is that we push the government for a conversation, sitting around the table and working out terms upon which we can meet and discuss and live in the same space together. That's been, and draw up those terms.
How much of that's happening?
I think there's been some discussions about it, but it's never going to happen without the government's approval. And unless the people rise up and speak into this space and seek the government to do something about it, it'll never happen. And so, I say to the church, hey, be a voice for the downtrodden, for the oppressed, especially in this space. Every other nation, every other colonised country on the face of the planet have drew up treaties with the First Nations people, but not in this country. It's never happened. And so that needs to be addressed. And people are afraid of this word treaty, but all a treaty is a sovereign nation sitting down, having a discussion, draw up terms of reference on how they can coexist in the one space. It's not a one-sided affair, but it's a conversation, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. So, but getting back to your question, God's going to sort it all out one day, Kels, and I'm looking forward to that day. I might not be here. I'm probably dead and gone by then, but that's all right.
Lord, by then.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Can you tell us what are some things that we can do, both as individuals and the church, to learn more and address issues of personal and systemic racism? We've been talking about both today. So what are some things that we can do?
Try to engage with Aboriginal people. It's a little bit hard at Manly. There's not a lot of Aboriginal people live on the North Shore there in Sydney. But do what you've been doing. Connect with Aboriginal people through mission, through partnerships in that way. Where you're able to, seek out conversations in that space. Invite people into your church. A lot of the stuff you're already doing. Get on to the different websites. Australians Together, they have a website that has a lot of great resources for educating people about the Indigenous story. And the reason why they call themselves Australians Together, because it's a shared history, regardless of whether or not we like it. It is a shared history. It's not just the Aboriginal story, it's the non-Indigenous story as well. So, this story has affected all of us, and therefore there needs to be an education process in place for that. And Australians Together website is just one website that is doing a lot of work in this space. Lobby the various governments, both federal, state and local governments to have an educational program in the education system. Tell the truth. That's a big starting point. And people today have not wanted to tell the truth. The history, a lot of the good side of the history of this country. Sure, they want to hold on to that, but they don't want to talk about all the injustices. The slavery that had taken place, the children taken from families, you know, the murders and the rapes, and people might say, well, you know, why don't you get over all of that? Because the effects of what took place years ago still affect our people today. You know, you talk about intergenerational racism or systemic racism. There's a thing called intergenerational trauma that has been passed on from generation to generation to generation. Now, it's those sorts of things that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
You know, Aboriginal people are over represented in the prison system. Up in the Territory, 97% of the juvenile justice population are Aboriginal kids. You know, that's staggering.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself the question, well, why is that? And, you know, and the BLM stuff, they're all been protesting about, you know, people being killed, especially in Australia, you know, people dying in custody. It's one thing for people to be dying in custody, but you've got to ask yourself the question, well, why are there so many people in the prison system to start with? What is that issue? And people will turn around, they'll come up with all sorts of excuses, but I think that issue needs to be addressed. You know, a lot of people are put into prison for fines, you know, not paying fines and stuff like that. And so Aboriginal people are overrepresented in the prison system, and therefore, if there's more Aboriginal people represented in the prison system, you're going to have more people dying in the prison system. And look, I'd be the first to admit that a lot of those people haven't died as a result of foul play, but there have been some. And no one, from the time of the handing down of the Black Deaths in Custody report, has been brought to justice on any of those issues. You know, again, you got to ask yourself the question, well, why isn't that the case?
Yeah.
You know, the media's got a lot to play, big part to play in all this as well. Every time they're talking about Indigenous issues on the media, whether it be Channel 9, Channel 7, whatever the case may be, very rarely will you see an Aboriginal people on a panel when they're talking about Indigenous issues. It's always white people, non-Indigenous people, talking about our issues.
Yeah. And
they expect that they've got all the answers. Hey, I don't have all the answers for our problems. I don't know. They're going to have them all. But at least, the very least that they can do is get Aboriginal representation onto some of these, you know, TV outlets.
People who've got skin in the game.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I'm curious, with everything going on in the world that we've been seeing happening in the States, what are some of the issues that are unique to Indigenous Australians here? And then also, what about Christian Indigenous Australians?
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? I think that the issue in the States is completely different to the issues here in Australia, in that the issues in the States are driven by cultural Marxist group, Antifa. That's not the case here in this country. And so there is a big difference there. What's happening here in this country are people who are genuinely concerned about the injustices to Indigenous people are rising up and saying enough's enough. And whilst that's happening over in America as well, there's a political movement behind that. And that's not the case here in this country. And so, sorry, Kelsey, I forgot the question. What was the question again?
Oh, just issues that are unique to Indigenous Australians and also Christian Indigenous Australians. Yeah,
look, I was talking about the Christian Indigenous situation. I was over in Israel 2 years ago, at GAFCON, and I made mention on this of the pastor's heart the other day, and it was interesting. Australia sent over 300 delegates, and I was one of those delegates. You know, out of the 300 delegates that we sent across, there were 3 Aboriginal people in attendance.
Wow.
That was me, my wife Kathy, and Nathaniel, our son.
Yeah, wow.
And you get over there, and I thought, this is fantastic. It's great to see the church in Australia supporting and encouraging the black nations of the world. I thought I was in heaven. You know, you know, it was the first time I've ever seen the church, black nations of the world, being a majority.
Mm.
and the white fellas being a minority. And guess what? Who was leading most of the worship and the teaching sessions? It was black people.
Mm.
And there were some white people involved. And the interesting thing about GAFCON is that it was the Australian clergy that pushed to set up GAFCON. And so here they are encouraging the black nations of the world in ministry and gospel ministry, and yet they struggle to do it effectively back on home soil. There's not the same energy placed within it. And to me, I sit back and I shake my head. I think, well, wait a second. I was really discouraged at that fact when I was over there, and I wanted to say something to the leaders at that time. But as I reflected, I thought, no, I shouldn't stir the pot while I'm here. I'll wait till I get back to the country, and God will raise up an issue, a time when I can talk about this. Probably when I'm a lot more calmer. And so, opportunities do present themselves where you can actually address some of those particular issues. So for Aboriginal Christians, we want to see our people empowered, trained up to be able to find their place within the life of the church. Mm-hmm. Hence the reason BCA has moved and looking at identifying and training of Indigenous people to train in gospel ministry. Mm. They want to see Aboriginal people as not only a people to be missionised, but also a people to be empowered to do ministry themselves. Mm. And so, I think the church can do a lot more in allowing Aboriginal people to become an active part of gospel ministry within its system.
Yeah. I've heard you say before that obviously Indigenous Christians have an easier time, not easy, but easier, I suppose, with the idea of reconciliation. And I've just been curious, how do you reconcile the way that the settlers came, and sure, they brought the gospel to Australia, but very few of them actually got it right. A few of them did. But I guess this has led to Indigenous people knowing Christ, but the way that it was done was so horrific. Just how do you reconcile that history with having the gospel?
The only thing that you can reconcile is to say that God is sovereign. And he has allowed that to happen, and I rest in knowing that. And for what reason, I don't know. And it's not for me to reconcile this in my thinking. For me, it's me to trust God in his sovereignty and his wisdom, that he knows what he's doing, and he does.
Yeah, he does.
And so when you talk about reconciling that in your own thinking, that's my take on the whole thing. That's how I'm at peace with knowing. And it's the same with bringing about justice. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And who knows? All the stuff that's happening, the fires last year and the pandemic now, maybe God is saying something to the world in regards to some of these issues. I just don't know.
Yeah.
But this one I think I do know is that he will do that which is right according to his will, and not Neville Naden's will, and not Kelsey's will, for want of a better expression. And we talk about reconciliation, don't we? Reconciliation for the Christian church, it's a positional truth. You and I are reconciled, not on the basis that I do something for you or you do something for me, but we are reconciled on the basis that Christ has done something for us both.
Right.
And, we're reconciled to God through Christ, and therefore you and I, in the eyes of God, are one people.
Yeah. And
when people realise that, because I think that places a bigger demand on our responsibility to one another. I really do. I've got a responsibility to look after Kelsey, and to serve my brothers and sisters at St. Matt's, and they too have a responsibility to me, and likewise to every other blood-bought saint of Christ who are Aboriginal people.
Yeah.
And I love that sort of thinking, you know. It just allows us to move forward together and pave a way forward for the gospel.
I love that too. And we will certainly be praying for all of those things to come about. However God decides to do it.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me today.
No worries, Kelsey. I hope it's been helpful.
Yes, definitely helpful. We always love hearing from you and hearing your wisdom on these topics.
No worries. Hi, everyone at St. Matt's. Love you guys. And no doubt we'll catch up in the not too distant future.
Yes. Thank you, Neville.
Rightio. God bless, Kels.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye.